Okay, welcome. This is day 3 of the Federalism unit, and the last one is it's a pretty short unit for us. So we're going to wrap up Federalism, and if you remember where we were when we left off here was the Democratic presidents Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson had put a lot of money given a lot of money to the states, but they national government controlled it. So when Richard Nixon wins in 1968, he comes into office and he's going to switch a lot of the control to the states. So the states are going to get more say. Part of how he gets elected is because there was this anger that had built up from people who thought that the Democrats and Lyndon Johnson were doing too much to help inner city African Americans. And so he kind of played on a lot of that, the Southern strategy, where he basically was getting a lot of sort of average white voters to vote Republican. And we'll talk a lot about how race changes and the parties change soon. But anyway, so he comes in. His program generally is called New Federalism, but the type of money he gives that he's going to focus on is general revenue sharing and block grants. Now, to think of these in like a spectrum, the most restrictive, the most control out of these 4 types of grants, the most national control are grants and aid. The next one are categorical grants. Right? The next one, which is pretty vague, the Republicans like, is block grants. And then the least restrictive on one end, where the states get to do whatever they want, is general revenue sharing. So Republicans would like general revenue sharing probably the most. General revenue sharing is just giving money to the state and saying, state, do whatever you want with it. Democrats don't like that idea. Even a lot of Republicans don't like, because they're just not sure what they would spend it on. So you have on one end grants and aid, and on the other end you have general revenue sharing. So in the middle, these are the ones that are used most of the time. In general revenue sharing isn't even done anymore. But you have the more Democratic favored categorical grants, and then you have the block grants that are favored more by Republicans. Block grants is money given to a state to a general category. So if I use the example I used the other day, where I said grants and aid would be money for to buy an iPad for the K-12 classroom. Categorical grants would be money for some sort of smart tablet or device in the classroom. You could just pick the brand or something, not much leeway. Well, then what Republicans would want to be a block grant, which would be money to education or money to technology. And so that would allow more leeway for the local and state governments. So basically, when you're going through those, which do you think is best? Would you rather have the national government tell North Carolina how to spend the money, or would you rather have North Carolina get the money and then they decide how to spend it? Who do you trust more? So there's been a shift a little more to power for the states in the last 30, 40 years. It was national government throughout the early part of the 1900s. So a couple things that are relatively recent that we should just know, and they have been on the AP test. Devolution is shifting power to the states, shifting to more local control. So 2 examples of that in recent years, somewhat recent years. U.S. v. Lopez, which is one of the required cases for this course. And in U.S. v. Lopez, the court struck down a law that banned guns on all school grounds, like high school, public school grounds. That may sound like a good law. I think most of us would say maybe you shouldn't have guns on school property. But the national government passed the law banning guns on all school property in America, called the Gun-Free School Zone Act. And then they tried to argue for it and said the reason they were allowed to do it constitutionally was because of the Interstate Commerce Clause. They said that because nowhere in the Constitution does it allow them to ban guns on all public school grounds. So their argument was, well, we have the right to regulate interstate commerce, so we have the right to ban guns on school grounds. Well, the court said no. It was a close decision and controversial, but the court said no. Somebody walking with a gun across Green Oaks property just to get to their house on the other side, that has nothing to do with interstate commerce. So they struck down that law. But that doesn't mean you can't ban guns on school grounds. It just means it can't be the national government. So states pretty much all ban. I'm pretty sure they all ban guns for most people to have them on school property. So So that was a states' rights decision. In 1996, we're going to get into this in much detail later, welfare was changed. Clinton's a Democrat, but he agreed with the Republican Congress, and they took control of welfare, like checks in the mail to people, and they gave the control of welfare to the states. And so now states decide who gets a welfare check, not the national government, which used to be years ago. So those U.S. v. Lopez and welfare reform in 1996, those are two examples of devolution. Now, I wanted to get to, this is the last thing for this chapter, our mandates. I find these interesting when I'm in class. I kind of build up stories on these and tell a lot of stories, and hopefully we'll have class and you can hear some of that. But a mandate, your parents could mandate that you do something. A mandate is just an order. And so a mandate in government terminology is an order from the federal government to the states to do something. Mandates can be unfunded or funded or even partially funded. States obviously least like unfunded mandates. That's if the national government tells them to do something, doesn't give them any money. So if it's a totally funded one, it's like, whatever, okay, we'll do it, but you're going to give us money. So anyway, so a mandate's an order from the U.S. government. Some of the more well-known ones I listed here. Now, I'll start at the bottom. Endangered Species Act, Endangered Species Act says they're endangered species, and it's somewhat funded, but it's kind of left up to local game wardens and state park workers and maybe police and things like that to help enforce it. So there is some cost for local governments too. There have been two Clean Air Acts. Clean Air Act is again, there's local aspects. They have to enforce it. The EPA does get involved in every state, and so they're going to do some enforcing of that too. Homeland Security Act passed after 9/11, 2001, and it's sort of a partially funded. Some states, basically the Homeland Security Act just says, keep things safe against terrorist attacks and things. So some places in the country get plenty of money, and it's quite a bit for them to keep safe. New York City has always been fighting this battle because they have so many targets. They probably have as many targets as the rest of the country combined for terrorists. And so no matter how much money the national government gives them, it won't be enough. And so New York City often complains that they have to spend a lot of their own money on this law and just keeping them safe, because they have to protect so many things. All the buildings, like Empire State Building and the New World Trade Center, but they have two of the most famous bridges, probably two of the most famous bridges in the world, or at least in the U.S., with the Brooklyn Bridge and the George Washington Bridge, and they have several major airports and Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty and a port and rivers and the metro system and the United Nations and Wall Street, and there's just so much. So they do have to spend a lot of their money on that. Motor Voter Act is often on the AP test for some reason. I'm not sure why. Bill Clinton signed that into law in the 1990s, and that's an unfunded mandate. It basically says that DMVs have to let you register to vote there. So maybe some of you have done that. Probably not a big expense on local governments. Probably not a big deal, but so that's been around for 20 plus years now. No Child Left Behind was a law put into place when George W. Bush was in office. It was sort of a democratic thing in a way because it was some national control over education. Most of this law has been scrapped. People from both parties ended up not liking it a whole lot because it was a partially funded but probably not funded enough mandate, and it's kind of disappeared. But the final one at the top there, Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. You all see this, and you may not even realize it. You're so accustomed to it, but Americans with Disabilities Act says that public places that are open to people in the public, they have to be accessible to people with disabilities. So that has led to all kinds of things that you see even right at Green Hope, but in public buildings. It leads to handicapped parking spaces and elevators and ramps and automatic door openers. And outside my classroom, you put your hand on the door number and it's in Braille. It's led to the way they do their fire alarm system, which is something I'll get to with the story if we do a live session in class. It's led to all kinds of things. It led to doors having to be wider than they were previously, put regulations on it so wheelchairs could get in. And this was an unfunded mandate. So this made a lot of people around the country upset because businesses and government buildings and schools and stuff had to be changed to meet American Disabilities Act, and it was unfunded. But most of us, I would think, believe that that is a good law to have in place. So the thing with mandates, so mandates are orders from the national government. They can be very controversial, but they're orders from the national government that may or may not come along with money. So anyway, that is a little over 10 minutes for today, and it wraps up this section. Again, as always, let me know if you have any questions. Thank you very much.